Hey everyone, welcome to this video series where I'm putting together a Pokemon game. In this video, we're gonna hook up our animation controller and get our character animated. Let's get to it. So if you've been following along, you probably are in the same situation where we are, where we're walking around and we're jumping. But one issue that I had with the game was that I felt that my jump height was a little bit too low. So I went back into the code and I set that from 10 to 20. And let's see where that gets us. Oops. Yeah, I've got multiple versions of the project open. So let's do this one here. And let's look at the trainer. And we'll see that the jump height, in my case, maybe you've messed with it, but in my case, it's still set to 2 in the editor. And Ryder is actually telling us this. It says it's changed in +1 asset. So if we click on it, we'll see that there are differences here. And there are differences both in our scene and in our assets prefab. So if you remember, in Unity, we had the prefabs folder right here with our trainer. And what we have in here actually is supposed to mimic our prefab. So in our prefab, the jump height is set to 2. In the scene, the jump height is also set to 2, and we can see that there's this blue line, which means that there is a difference between our trainer and between the asset that we are actually using. Now, sometimes that makes a lot of sense. For instance, with main camera, to save that in your prefab, I don't feel that makes a lot of sense because your game might not have a main camera if you want to use this prefab in another game, for instance. But in this case, for the jump height, you probably want it to match up well. So what you can do is you can click on revert and then it will set us back to the value of the prefab, but that's in this case also 2, so that's not great. So what we're gonna do is the following. We have it up to 20 here. I think that's fine. And then we can make sure that it's just copying that over everywhere. So I'll just put the 20 in here. And yeah, this is already set to revert, so it'll mimic the prefab. And if we go back here, our 20 is unchanged. So if we change things in our code, we know that there's not going to be a conflict. So anyways, we should have our jump height by making these changes the way we like it. So we should jump a little higher so we actually have time to do an animation in between. So let's move and let's jump, and we can no longer jump to infinity, which is great because this is not a Buzz Lightyear movie, right? All right. Wonderful. So with that, I think I should be ready to start working on the animation almost. Maybe one thing that we can do as well is mess a little bit with the ground cast distance, because this is quite a bit. I think this is 15 centimeters, right? So let's put the debug back on. And actually the debug, we've never removed that. At least I didn't. I hope you haven't either, because I'm just going to show you now. And if we click on gizmos up here while we're testing, we should see the line as we are jumping from our raycast. So I want to make that line a little bit shorter for where it's going to be good. And we're going to do one that is going to be 0.05 and then see what it does for us to just give it a little less flexibility. Here we go. Yeah, that still works fine, and now there's a lot less flexibility, so we can't inadvertently get a double jump out of there. All right. Yeah, so I think with that out of the way, we can start looking at setting up our animations. Now, there's 4 animations that I would love to implement right now. The first one is just standing still or idle. The second one is walking, which we've already got implemented. The third one is jumping. Again, we've already have this implemented. And the fourth one is running. So we don't have running implemented yet. So let's quickly add some code that will allow our character to run. And we'll start by setting a run speed. And let's say that when we're running, we're going about maybe 3 times as fast. Who knows? We can tweak it later on, because you kind of want to tweak these values so that they match your animations well. And I have no idea how that's going to work out. So we'll figure the numbers out later. So how do we implement the run? Well, we can do it in a similar way as what we've been doing here for our jumping. So we can just get the input. Now, we're not going to use get button down, because get button down, if you remember, that will trigger whenever our button has been pressed for the first time. So we basically want players to keep our run button, which is typically shift, down and you will just keep running. It's not a trigger in the same way that a jump would be a trigger. So instead of using get button down, we're just going to use, and actually we can't use get button entirely either, because if we open up the button, those actually come from the project settings, from the input manager. And as you can see here, we do have a jump, but we don't have a run here. And while we could have fire 1, 2, or 3 be associated with running, I just don't want to do it that way because it just gets too weird. And actually Unity is telling us, like, you should probably use the input system package, which is a more advanced input system. We're not going to do that because we got a pretty straightforward minimal game that we are making here. But if you're making a more complicated game, that might be something worth looking into. So instead of using the get button method for input, we're going to use get key instead. And we can't use get key down because that will only trigger when we push it down, not key up because that's when you release a button. So we're just going to use get key, which, as you can see, will be true as long as the key identified is being held down. So what key are we going to use since it hasn't been defined yet? Well, there's an enumerator that we can use called key code, and one of the values that it has is left shift. So by doing that, we can get the input for whenever the player pushes left shift or keeps it down to become true, and that would be great. So with that in mind, we're going to put an else in here as well. So let's close first and then put the else. All right, wonderful. And we're just going to use the 3 speeds. Let's just keep things simple. So what we used to have, we're going to put here. So if shift is not being pushed down, we're going to use a regular speed. If shift is being pushed down, let's use a value for run speed. And that's pretty straightforward to put this together. There will be many other ways as usual to code this, but I think this is something that everybody can understand pretty easily. And this should allow for our character to start run around unless I made some horrible mistakes. So let's see. I've got a compiler error. Let's see what that could be. So one of the cool things, in case you haven't noticed, you can click on problem here, double click, and I forgot a semicolon. So everything, all the errors from Unity will also be available in problems in Writer, so you don't have to constantly go back and forth between them, which saves you a lot of time. All right, let's reassemble the code. Walk around. I'm going to turn off the gizmo thing. There we go. Because the focus thing will just make that white thing flicker. And when I press shift now, I am going really fast. Now, it's not looking super great, I feel, but we'll see when we have a run animation how fast we actually want to run. But this works fine for now. And I think with that in place, we're ready to start looking at hooking up some animations then. So let's start with the basics, and we're going to go to models, animations, and in here you could make a separate folder for animations if you like. I'm typically not too keen on making a whole bunch of subfolders here, but what I like to do is just set up AC trainer, and that's going to be our animation controller that I just selected. So create animation controller, and if you double click that, it will open up a tab up here, which I prefer to click and drag out and move it here next to my project so that I can still see what's going on here. And I like to then set these like so. There we go. Because what we have here is basically a simple state machine, and any modern game engine kind of uses this for animation. So you start with an entry point and you have an exit point. And you can make multiple layers and you can make very complicated animations that way. So what we're going to do is we are going to drag out our idle. And if we drag it in, immediately it will make a connection. It'll make a transition. So if we press play now, we should see that animation in action. No, not yet. Okay, I guess we're not seeing an animation in action yet because I didn't hook up the controller yet. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our animation controller is connected to our character. So what we're going to do here is, actually it's already right there. It's the animator that you want. So you just hook it up as a component, and then you take AC trainer and you drop it into controller. There we go. Avatar is not something that we're going to use in this series, I think, but there's more to having animations for a game than just this. But Once we have a component with an animator and an animator controller and then an animation in that animator controller, we should be able to press play, hopefully now. And yeah, so here we go. That's our idle animation. And that's pretty neat, right? So our character's kind of moving about now, and it looks like it's a pretty lengthy idle. Eventually, I think it should just stop though. I mean, this looks like a very lengthy idle. Well, it's hard to see the animation, but I think, yeah, mine has stopped now. So it stopped animating because it's not looping. So that's one thing that you want to learn to do right away. So you go into your animations here and you set up the loop time. And I like to do this for all of them. I think you can actually, if I'm not mistaken, multi-object editing is not supported. So I guess we're doing this manually for each of them. So yeah, let's have them all loop. Falling idle. So yeah, and just in case, I have a falling idle, which I'm going to use for jumping. I have a regular idle, I have a slow run, I have a walking, and a throw that we're not going to be using right away. And I think the throw actually doesn't need the loop animation. But those are the animations that we have. So yeah, cool. And we have our idle hooked up. So how can we now go with our code from that idle to another animation, you ask? Well, let's set that up. And let's start maybe with our little jump. That seems fun. So I'm going to use falling idle for my jump, which is the animation that I felt worked well for that. Usually when you have a jump animation, you're going to have one where the character lifts off from the ground. So a build-up, like a gather, if you will, where you gather your momentum and you start to jump. And you have one when you're landing. That's all way too complicated for the scope of this project, so I'm not doing that. But just so you know, that's why I picked a falling animation. So if we, I need to throw the mesh for the trainer in here so you can see what it actually looks like, or it's supposed to look like. So when I press play, it's pretty much just hanging in thin air. It's an animation where when you're falling, but I felt like this will look nice with some blending and transitions for a jump animation as well. It'll look pretty cool. So here's what we'll do. We're gonna right click idle, make transition, and then click on falling idle. And we also want to be able to go back from it. So we're gonna right click falling idle and then click the idle. And now we have connectors that will allow us to go from one node to the next. And there's a lot of, if we click on these connectors, we'll see a whole bunch of settings. Now, the first one that we want to do is, since this is going to be somewhat procedurally animated, we want Unity to calculate how to go from one animation to the next. So we don't want any of these animations that we're going to be using for this to be able to complete fully. And if you look at has exit time, that means that Unity will wait until your animation has finished before it goes from one state to the next state. So we don't want any exit times, and we're going to have to do that manually as well. I tried doing it by selecting all the arrows and then clicking it, and it only does the last one. So that's one thing that we want to do. Now the other is, how does Unity know to go from idle to falling idle? Well, to do that, we need to set conditions. And I'm going to make this preview a little bit smaller again. And we can just add parameters, but right now, none of them exist yet. So I'm going to click on the minus again, and I'm going to show you how that works. So you see parameters here, click on it, and you can just type in a name. So let's say our parameters, let's say we have one for jumping. So is jumping, and we're going to use this as a Boolean. Oh, sorry. That was actually the search window that I was typing in. So we're just going to call it is jumping, and we're going to do 3 Booleans. We're going to do one for is running, is jumping, and then a final one for is walking. Now, you could set this up in a different way, because with a Boolean, it's going to be, in our code, we're going to tell Unity when we're jumping, false or true. When we're running, false or true. When we're walking, false or true. That's what the Boolean will do. However, we could just make a float or an integer or even a trigger here, which are equally valid options. We could just be like, hey, if our speed is higher than a certain value, and we can just pass along an integer from our code to the animation controller, we could change this out. And that would be one way to do it. But I feel personally, usually when I make a game, I just work with Booleans unless I have a really good reason to not to do it. So we're going to use Booleans for this example, but feel free to experiment with this as much as you like, because there's many different ways of doing this again. So with that in mind, I think we can go back to Writer and set this up. And the code that we need for this is actually pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go into the jump first, because just to make sure that I'm not making any mistakes while I'm doing this. So how do you talk to something else in Unity? And I'm asking you this as a question, because if you don't know this yet, this is something that you probably want to think about for a second. How would we connect to that animation controller from this player controller? Well, the correct answer to that is we can just hook it up in the same way that we've hooked up a character controller or a camera or any of the other things that we've been using. So I'll just do this again: serialize field, tooltip, insert. I mean, and this is kind of redundant to add this information for it, but you know, maybe it's useful sometime. And we're gonna make a private animator. There we go. And we are gonna call it player, oops, yeah, that's correct, player animator. I thought there was a mistake there because the P looks so weird, but like, yeah. So we're gonna call it that, and well, it's gonna refresh the solution in Unity, but I think it just did that. So let's go back to our Unity and go to the trainer, and let's see here. We should have a new slot for the animator, so we can just click here, drag our animator in there, and then I'm gonna press Ctrl and S for saving. But I think that should be fine. Now, as you can see, there's a warning here. It'll say, well, there's no exit time or condition, so this transition will never be used. Well, yeah, we're trying to fix that, Unity. So, all right. So what we're going to do is with our jump, basically, as we are doing this, we're jumping. So we are going to talk to our player animator. So player animator dot, and we're going to talk to the Boolean in there. So we're going to set bool. And we have 3 booleans in there, and this one is called, I wonder if it actually gets edited by Writer. I don't think Writer can actually see it. But we're going to set our boolean is jumping to not grounded. Because when we are jumping, we are not grounded, right? So that's what the operator in front of it does. So not grounded, that's what we want. So yeah, so this will tell our animator here that this value needs to change when we are not jumping. So let me show you this before we do any code, and because this is why you'll see immediately now why I put that thing down there. So when I press jump, see how that check mark comes up? So now our animator knows what our code is doing. And it's also really cool that you can see how AN trainer idle, that animation is running. And you'll see when it comes to the end, since we set the loop time, that is just going to start playing again. So this is super helpful if you're an animator and you're trying to figure out what's going wrong. You can literally see it as you are testing your game in the engine or in the editor. So, okay, anyways, conditions. So we're going to plus condition. When jumping is true, we go to falling idle. When jumping is false, we go back. Let's see if that works. All right. I think that looks good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're still, doing this stuff, but look at us jump. I think the height looks nice. Like, this is fine. Like, obviously it's not a very sophisticated jump animation, but it looks, the trainer kind of looks like they're doing an ollie on a skateboard, sure. But, it's personality. Like, I don't want to spend time on finding a better animation for this or hooking up multiple animations, but that might be a fun exercise to do if you want to make your game look prettier. I'll reward you for it in some way. But yeah, so we got that set up. So next up, let's do the same for the other ones. So this might be a good time to pause the video, because I'll show you the result rather than going through it step by step, because it's basically the same thing. You want to add code at the right spots in your code, or actually, yeah, just pause it here and try to do everything yourself, and I'll just show you what it's supposed to be as we move along. So this is where you press pause, and now we are playing again. All right, so I'm going to bring the other animations in now, and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can. So mine is called slow run, the other one is called walking. And well, I already know that everything is going to be connected to everything, right? Because at some point when, we might jump and we might land, and then we want to go to walking. So we want to get all that stuff sorted out. So pretty much right-click, make transition, right-click, make transition the other way, right-click, make transition, right-click, make transition the other way, right-click, make transition, and right-click, make transition the other way. And that's what our state machine, if you want to call it that, is going to look. Oh, wait, right click, make transition, right click, make transition the other way. So, because all these, you might be running and you might go from running to jumping and vice versa. You might go from jumping to running. So all these things should be animated for our animations to work. And now we're going to have to hook up all these arrows as well. But first, before I do that, I'm going to set up my code. So I'm just going to copy paste this because this should be pretty straightforward. And then we are going to go probably into, let's see, what would be a good spot to do this? Well, actually, I think, first I need to know when we're actually moving, right? So how do we figure out when we're actually moving? Well, we can grab the magnitude of this movement vector to pretty much figure out what's going on. And if that magnitude, the length of that vector is going to be greater than 0, we know we're moving. So how about we do if movement magnitude is greater than 0. Oops, I shouldn't need it here. Oh gosh. Yeah, like that. If that is happening, we can dock here and we know that it's walking. And in this case, we are walking. Else, clear animation set bool, it's going to be false, are walking. All right, so that'll give us some information on when we're walking or not. And then we just need to know when we are running or not. And we can kind of do that with the shift key here. So let's just, this code is getting a little bit messy, but I mean, it's a small project. I think it's fine. It's walking, so let's say it was called it's running, I think. So in this case, it's running, and it's running. And now obviously you want to make sure that everything's hooked up correctly, but it's going to be easy to test. So I think here we are not running, so this should be false. So the next thing to do is go in here again. Go in here again. Okay, there we go. Look at the game, press play, and just look at the booleans quickly to see if everything's working well. So it takes a brief second for, because the move function has a little slowdown. So, but I think that's fine because you want the animation to fade out as well. When we press shift, we're running fast. When we release shift, so I think, this looks like it's communicating correctly. And as you can see, these things will trigger at the same time. So now we need to implement the logic for all these arrows here and what these things need to be. Now, I'm going to do one thing, and then I think it's a good time to, if you're watching this, I'm just going to fast forward so you don't have to see me do everything. But what I like to do is just grab all of them, set them like this, and set them all to false, right? And then you can right click on conditions, copy, so that it becomes really easy to go to the next one. Click on conditions, paste, and then just go through them. And we're not going to need all 3 of them everywhere, but a lot of the time that makes things easier. And I don't know if you can just select multiple of them to paste, but if that was the case, that'd be great. No, it's only the first one you select, so that's, dang it. But yeah, but this will save a whole bunch of time because now I don't have to do those steps immediately. So that's kind of helpful. And then, here we go. I think this one's already set up and is correct. So that's pretty great. All right, now fast forward the video real briefly because I felt like this is going to just take a long time for me to hook them all up with the logic correctly, and I'll probably make a mistake left and right too. But I've hooked everything up and I think this should be correct the way I have it now. But let's see if it actually works. But one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make sure that all these transitions, because I forgot about that they don't have the exit times on. Because no transition, with that idle animation being so long, if you press play and nothing is working, it's going to be because of your exit time. Because it's going to want to run through idle entirely before it does anything else. So you want to make sure that none of these have an exit time. And I'm just double checking this right now. Yep, this one still has an exit time. So annoying. Why can't they just do the exit time by default? Maybe there's an option there. Or leave it in the comments if you know how to fix that. So yeah, with that in mind, so I'll quickly run over everything. Well, let me see if everything works for me, and then we can run over it. So there's a little glitch in the beginning, but we're walking, we're jumping, we're walking backwards, sideways. I mean, you want to put a strafe animation in there, but I'm not going to bother with that for this demo. And we can run at higher speed. Now, as you can see, the speed is way faster than the animation here. And with the walk, I feel the speed's faster than the animation as well. So that's something we can fix by tweaking our values a little bit. So what is the logic that I have? So going from idle to running, I mean, actually, you know, in animations, you're going to have priorities. So in this case, jumping is a big priority. Whenever you press spacebar, we need to be jumping immediately. So we don't need to check anything else whenever we're jumping. All the arrows for jumping are just going to be like, as soon as jumping's true, done, we're going. But then for the other ones, to idle, everything falls. I think that's the same for all of them. And since running and walking can happen at the same time, running will have to override walking a lot. So in this case, for running, if running turns true and we're not jumping, we're going. However, for walking, we need running to be false. So, okay, that makes sense. And then to go from walking to running, we don't even need to look at the walking, because walking might be true, but as soon as running turns true, we're going. And same way, other way around. We need to check that running is false for walking to be true. And jumping, pretty much similar type of thing. So that's the logic. Yeah, you can mess around with it if there's something not working for you and just, you know, see how it goes through it. It should be pretty easy to debug with the visualization here. So let's look at the values that we have. I think some better values for this. Let me see. I think for a walk speed, something like 2 will probably be good. And then for a run speed, let me see, how did I do the code again for that? So we're basically just multiplying it that way. Maybe like 3 times faster. That might be appropriate. So let's save it, and we can already see that there's going to be conflicts with our editor. So let's check that out as well. Oops, here we go. So our trainer here, yeah, let's change up the prefab. So we had 2 for this. I think I put down 6 here. And then in the trainer, okay, so this reverts automatically as well. So 2 and 6 is unchanged. All right. So yeah, let's press play and let's see how good this looks or how bad this looks. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That looks natural to me. I mean, not when we're strafing. You would need a strafing animation. And, you know, you could check the magnitude over the what is it? The x-axis to fix that. Also, yeah, this is moonwalking. So you would want to have it backwards, or you just want to, as soon as you press backwards, turn the character around entirely, although that would require a different camera system. I mean, I think this is fine for the purpose. For, you know, you can make it as complicated as you like for your own project. I think it's the same principle. Running, however. Yeah, I think that's okay-ish. 5 might be better, so I'm just going to change it to 5 in my project. But if you've played any of my games, I'm notorious for making my characters walk slower than what my players usually like. So, yeah, it is what it is. I like characters to move slow through games. Like, I'm not a big fan of characters running super fast. You know, same with jumping. So, yeah, let's run it one more time. But I think with that, yeah, this looks great. This looks super realistic to me. But, you know, opinions are probably different depending on who you are. So, yeah, I think, you know, usually, like I said earlier, you would have more animations for the jumping, more animations for going back and strafing and everything. And there's a little glitch when we start, because for some reason we just scoot immediately to the falling idle there. But I'm not 100% sure why this is happening, so I'll figure this out at a later time, and we'll just wrap up this video. Anyways, I think this is fine for this video. I hope this was super helpful to figure out how to set up a controller and everything, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.